with a funny story. This didn't happen anytime recently, but it says a little boy wanted $100 badly and prayed to God for a whole week, but nothing happened. So he decided to write God a letter requesting the $100. When the post office got the letter addressed to God, they forwarded it on to the White House. The president was very impressed, touched, and amused, so he instructed his aide to send the boy $5. He thought $5 would be a lot to the little boy. The boy was indeed delighted by the money. He sat down and wrote a thank you note immediately, which read, "Dear God, thank you very much for sending the money. However, I noticed that for some reason you had to send it through Washington, and as usual, they kept most of it." Like I said, that didn't happen recently. In fact, we're praying for our government. So I just want you to know that I'm on that same page with you, that I'm praying. Turn with me to Matthew 5:5, and that's our text for today. The opening text in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." In our culture today, being meek seems countercultural. We look at our business world and all of the deadlines, stocks to watch and markets to navigate, and the stock market, in fact, that sometimes a lot of people are really in tune with, especially today. And it seems like in the business world, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are the most aggressive, that catch the tiger by the tail and know how to get things accomplished. In sports, it's the same way, with contracts and putting yourself out there, agents to impress and scouts to please. There's high pressure in sports today too, and it seems like the ones who are meek, kind of quiet, sometimes you get the feeling that they're the ones that are overlooked. Movies, kind of the same thing, that Hollywood presents an aggressive, strong, popular, rich approach to being successful. But Jesus has a different plan in mind when he talks about meekness. He talks about being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so this morning we're going to answer the question, what does it mean to be meek, and how is this an advantage in my life? Johnny Moore, the vice president of Liberty University, addresses Matthew 5:5, and he explains that Jesus was proclaiming a countercultural truth. In other words, it was going against what the culture of that time had to say about meekness. This was a world that understood power. There were Caesars there, and we're not talking about Little Caesar's pizza. There were armies that made people in rebellion wake up by their sheer force. And Jesus wasn't talking again to the rich and powerful. He was preaching to villagers. And his message was strength under control. Sometimes people try to define meekness as being weak, timid, and even cowardly sometimes, like the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz. The biblical understanding of meekness is power or strength under control. And that's our first point this morning, that we're looking at power under control. It means refusing to puff up our own self-worth, a reservation to asserting ourselves for our own personal gain. Look with me at Romans 12:3, and it says, "For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." As servants of God, we should also not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to. One commentator explains we should accept strengths and limitations for what they truly are, yet at the same time, not denying our strengths and abilities. We look at Matthew 11:4 4 through 6. And here Jesus is a good personal example of what it means to walk in humility and walking in meekness. Verse 4 says, Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me." Remember, earlier in this passage, it was John that asked the question, John the Baptist, "Are you the Messiah, or do we look for another? Are you really the one who's going to be our Redeemer and our rescuer?" And here Jesus doesn't give a verbal self-defense. He doesn't promote himself and say, "Hey, John, I'm your guy." Tell him that. When the disciples go back to or when John's disciples go back and give word to him. But Jesus appeals to the effects of his work. He's saying, let my actions speak in this situation. Just look at what's going on. Ben Witherington provides this commentary on his perspective on John's situation and the state that he's in when he sends these disciples to Jesus. He says, what John seems to have not yet understood is that Jesus did not come to meet our expectations as to what a Messiah or Savior ought to do indeed. He came to meet our needs. And that's what Jesus did. He came to meet our needs. He came to seek and to save that which was lost, Luke 19:10. Turn with me to Psalm 37, 1 through 11. This is a Psalm of David. And in here we see some parallels with what Jesus is presenting in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:5. But I just invite you to follow along as I read this passage here this morning. And just think of how it addresses the subject of meekness, of humility. "Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass, and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. It only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, but it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." Some other characteristics of meekness are exercising power for the benefit of all, not just ourselves. To curb our urge to avenge the wrongs done against us and use our strengths to serve not ourselves but others. There's a quote that says, "Meekness is not weakness, but strength harnessed for service." And I think that's appropriate in what we're talking about this morning, because it's not just like that lion that Aaron and I were talking about earlier that just wants to roar and just devour everything in its path. But it's more like that little lamb on the very edge of the corral that lets out this tiny little roar and says, "Hey, I'm here. I've got a job to do." The Adam Clark commentary talks about our word meek in the English language, and it comes from the Old Anglo-Saxon Mecca, or Makia, and it means a companion or equal. And so it doesn't have that sense of feeling superior to anyone else, and not haughty like the Pharisees or the scribes, as they looked down upon the people that they were supposed to be ministering to. Albert Barnes' note states, meekness is patience in the reception of injuries. It is neither meanness nor a surrender of our rights, nor cowardice, but it is the opposite of sudden anger, of malice, of long-harbored vengeance. It is receiving injuries with the belief that God will vindicate us, that God will have the final word. According to Haddon Robinson, tied up in the word meek is the concept of power under control, the idea of being submissive to someone greater than ourselves. And being meek does not mean lack of strength or motivation. It means having strength that is under God's control. Dr. Samuel Brengle of the Salvation Army said, the axe cannot boast of the trees it has cut down. It could do nothing but for the woodsman. He made it, he sharpened it, he used it. The moment he throws it aside, it becomes only old iron. Oh, that I may never lose sight of this. And that's my prayer too. God, that you would never allow me to lose sight of the fact that without you, I can't accomplish anything. Nothing lasting happens when we try to do it on our own without the strength of the Lord. There's an illustration that comes from a Christian writer, and his last name is Mattoon. And these are his words. He talks about the Greek word for meek in Matthew 5:5. And he says, this word was used to describe an animal which has been domesticated, which has been trained to obey the word of a command, which has learned to answer to the reins. It is the word for an animal which has learned to accept control, such as the taming of a wild stallion. Thus, the meek man has self-control. He has his passions and anger under control. He knows when it is the proper time to be angry at that which is wrong or unjust, and when not to be angry. Ruling your spirit is meekness. It takes great strength to have self-control and self-discipline. And I agree with what he has to say there regarding meekness. Proverbs 16:32 says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes the city. We go back to the idea of strength under control. There was a man who was working in dairy farm construction, and his crew built what is called a comfort stall barn for an Amish family living in Indiana. And the children on the place ranged from teenagers to little toddlers, just kind of running around on this Amish settlement. And the writer especially liked watching a little 5-year-old boy named Levi. They farmed with Belgian horses. Have any of you ever seen a Belgian horse just up close in real life? They're huge. They stand several hands taller than the average horse. And Levi could walk upright underneath these horses and not hit his head on their bellies. He was just about as tall as their legs. And one day, a team of Belgians was standing in the barnyard, and fastened on behind them was a hitching bar resting on the ground. And the bar could be hitched to wagons or other horse-drawn equipment, which the horses would pull. So they were just standing there ready. It was almost like having a tractor idling off on the edge of the barnyard where it's just ready to go. And Levi's father told him his brothers needed the team out in the field. So Levi picked up the reins, he stepped onto the bar, and he shouted a command at the horses, and they obeyed his command, and he drove them off, riding on the hitch out to the field. Just a little 5-year-old kid just behind 2 weak horses. And that's power under control. That's what we're talking about when we say that there's power that's under control. The second point is, for they shall inherit the earth. For David, the land referred to is the land of Palestine. And it's my understanding that what Jesus was referring to is more than just the land of Israel they were living in, but in a fuller sense, the kingdom of God would be the inheritance of those found faithful. If we consider Revelation 21, verse 1, it talks about a new heaven and a new earth. And that is going to be the final place of heaven, where Jesus brings that back down to earth. And we'll get to live here. And it's the new and improved version. It's not going to look like what it does today. It'll be different. But I believe it also includes the now earth that we live in. What Jesus' disciples were living in as he spoke to them in the Sermon on the Mount. An organization called the Theology of Work Project talks about what meekness should look like and presents this case in one of its commentaries on Matthew 5:5. It says, meekness flows from the sorrow we experience for our own shortcomings. If we feel sorrow for our own sins, can we really feel vengeful over the sins of others? Those who put forth the effort to help others are often admired. The meek let others join in conversations of important decisions and have better results and more meaningful friendships. So even in a broken, messy world, we can find peace when we recognize our strengths and weaknesses and live our lives openly before the Lord and our neighbors. It's how we treat other people that makes the difference. Turn with me back over to Matthew 5, and we'll look at verses 13, 14, and 16. Verse 13 says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. And then again in verse 16, let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And here Jesus is talking about that now experience of what we need to be doing right at this very moment. And he's not saying to his disciples, you will be the salt of the earth, so just hang on and you'll get to there eventually. Or you will be the light of the world. Or you'll have an opportunity to let your light shine before men, but that's going to be off in the future. He says it's right now. It's here. You do it now. Chuck Swindoll shares an illustration that describes the outcome of people who walk in meekness and humility. And here's his quote. In our rough and rugged individualism, we think of gentleness as weakness, being soft, and virtually spineless. Not so. Gentleness includes such enviable qualities as having strength under control, being calm and peaceful when surrounded by a heated atmosphere, emitting a soothing effect on those who may be angry or otherwise beside themselves, and possessing tact and gracious courtesy that causes others to retain their self-esteem and dignity. Instead of losing, the gentle gain. Instead of being ripped off and taken advantage of, they come out ahead. And so as we wrap this up this morning, I just want for all of us to take a good look at our heart on the inside. Ask ourselves the question, where's my meekness indicator right now? If it were located on a dashboard, would it be flashing like the warning light on an instrument panel? Or is it just needing some routine maintenance? And it's God's desire to help and encourage us. And in not just this area of our life, but in every aspect of our lives. And so as we close in prayer, just want to give you some time to reflect quietly on your own. But this is what I want us to check with the Lord on in our own quietness of our own spirit. Lord, place in me your meekness and your humility. Would you put that in my life? Would you continue to direct me in that relationship with you that I need to walk in? Continue to download that meekness and humility in my life and in my heart. And then secondly is let the world see it and be drawn to you. Let the world see that meekness and that humility in my life. Let's just take some time to reflect quietly in prayer as we prepare to conclude our service today. Let me just offer this concluding prayer as we close here this morning. Father, we are so thankful for your love. God, we thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your mercy. Lord, as we talk about a subject today that often the world would just try to dismiss as being behind the times. And it's not that way today, and it's countercultural. God, we know that by your words and by your actions that's what you modeled was meekness and humility. Lord, not a powerlessness and not the inability to speak up for what was right, because we know the story of how you went in and cleansed the temple, and you overturned the tables of the money changers who were selling animals and things in there for sacrifices. And you said, my house shall be called a house of prayer. That you made it a den of robbers. And Lord, we know that it was with strength and with conviction that you spoke those words. And so we're just asking, Father, that you would do that in our lives, that you would help us to allow you to place in us that meekness and humility that we need to have as followers of Christ. And at the same time, to let the world see that in us and be drawn to you. Lord, not because of our own personal gain and not because we want to do things that draw attention to ourselves, but we want you to be increased and lifted up in our lives. We want people to see you in us. And so, Lord, we're praying that you would help us to just carry that meekness, that gentleness, God, that you want us to have. Thank you and praise you for that. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for listening. God bless you. And remember our fellowship meal after the service. If you didn't bring anything, you're still welcome to come and eat with us downstairs. And so we'll give you this for that.